Okay, this is just a quick video. It's an overview of the General Mobile Radio Service as an introduction to an approach that we could possibly use for emergency communications here in Treasure Lake. This is put together to be available before a meeting that we have scheduled next week, and so we'll be brief, hopefully. Okay, the GMRS radio service has several aspects we're going to look at. There are some legal elements to it. We'll touch on some technical issues and a quick look at some of the equipment that's involved in this kind of a radio service. So for the legal aspect, the GMRS, or General Mobile Radio Service, is managed and controlled by the Federal Communications Commission. They're responsible for all the frequency transmissions in the U.S. And this is a land mobile FM UHF radio service designed for short distance two-way communication. And short distance means generally line of sight, which is particularly in a hilly environment, not particularly far, but there are ways through the use of a device called a repeater that you can use this type of communications effectively for what would be considered local communications. It does require a license in the United States. The license is a 10-year license. It's $35 for the 10 years. It is renewable, and there is no test. And this is one of the big differences between GMRS and amateur radio, where in amateur radio you need to pass tests to get licenses. And the license covers yourself and your immediate family. So you get your license established, you can do it online, $35, and then you and your family are good to go for 10 years. The GMRS shares a frequency band with the FRS, which is the family radio service, and these are the frequency ranges that both GMRS and FRS operates. Now, FRS is another radio service. It's even more restricted than GMRS in that it's restricted in terms of both the power that you can transmit and the type of radio you can use. An FRS radio has a permanently mounted antenna that you can't take off and upgrade, and generally run at 0.2 watts, and some of the frequencies you can be on up to 5 watts. So this is, but they do overlap GMRS and FRS, so you can operate on both of them. The FRS doesn't require a license. And one of the other legal aspects of it is that once you have a GMRS license from the FCC, then you're allowed to establish a repeater to extend their communications range. And for use in Treasure Lake for emergency communications, the repeater is going to be an important part of the system. And finally, here's the link to Wikipedia that discusses General Mobile Radio Service if you want to find out a little more in-depth information. Now, the next part on the technical, we'll talk about this a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, the range is considered line of sight. So essentially, you have to be able to see, or at least the signal needs to be able to see the receiving antenna in order for it to work. The repeater can extend the usable range. For example, if you can put a repeater with an antenna up on top of a hill, then you can contact the repeater because that's line of sight, and someone on the other side of the hill down in the valley contacts that repeater. You'll be able to communicate with that person with your signal going to the other guy um, through the repeater and then coming back to you through the repeater. So repeater can extend the usable range. There are 30 frequency channels that are used. We'll take a quick look at those in a minute. And it's generally in the vicinity. GMRS operates in the 462 to 467 megahertz range, whereas ham radio operates on UHF in the 420 to 450 megahertz range. So you're not able, there's no overlap between the ham radio frequencies that are allocated and the GMRS frequencies that are allocated. And there are 16 main channels and 14 interstitial channels, which will be in between the 16 main channels, and we'll take a look at that with a little table here in a second. And here's that table. Three basic groups of frequencies in GMRS and FRS, and you can see here one of the big differences. If we look here on the shared FRS and GMRS frequencies, the power limit on the family radio service is 2 watts, whereas you can use 5 watts on the GMRS. This is pretty typical of the power output of a hand walkie-talkie. So there's the 7 channels that can run 2 watts and 5 watts here. And then on these channels in this range here, you can see that we've got half a watt on FRS, which really limits the range, and GMRS is also limited to half a watt transmitting power in that range. The blue section is where the repeaters operate, and for a repeater to operate, it needs 2 frequencies. It needs a transmit frequency and a receive frequency, and that's where these frequencies are allocated in GMRS. And one thing to note is that this particular frequency, channel 20 here, the FRS channel 20, is the national GMRS calling channel. And what that is, it's a kind of a universal agreement in the GMRS system that if you're wanting to try to contact someone, you can go to this frequency and attempt to contact it, with the idea being that once you contact someone, then you agree to change frequencies and go to another channel, so this calling frequency channel can be left open for people to make contacts. And then this third group of frequencies are for the GMRS repeaters. And the phones that you get for GMRS will have all these things plugged in for you. Had a little alarm there I had to take care of. Okay, we're going to take a look at some of the equipment you typically use. I try to include typical equipment. There's a lot of different manufacturers, a lot of different prices, but this is generally what you might expect to spend if you're getting set up with GMRS. This is an example of a package that has 2 handheld transmitters and a programming cable. You know, you'd probably want 2, so you could have you and one other person in your family at least can be separated and be able to communicate. And this runs about 80 bucks. So that's a 2-pack. Obviously, you could get a 1-pack. Say if you needed 3, then you could just get another one. So that's kind of the basic handheld you'd take a look at. This is a mobile unit that would could be mounted in your car. It could also be mounted on your desk at home with an outside antenna, and you could communicate from home that way. And this one runs in the $165 range, which is fairly typical. You can get the more expensive and less expensive, but this is about what you would probably end up spending for a normal base or mobile unit. And finally, this is the third element of the system that might be needed if we use a repeater in Treasure Lake. This is the same type of repeater that the Ham Group uses for their UHF communications, and it would run about $1,500, which doesn't really make it prohibitively expensive if several people get together. And this is a look at some of the antennas you might see. This one here on the left is for a handheld. You can improve the performance of your handheld by an improved antenna, so you can swap that out. This is typically how a mobile antenna is mounted, where this is a magnet that attaches to the top of your car. It needs to be a metal car, steel. If this is plastic, it's not going to work very well, but there are ways around that too. And then if you have a base system at home, you could have an antenna, something like this, on a pole, and this could give you coverage. I have a similar antenna, and I'm able to cover from, let's say, Treasure Lake down to Altoona, New Kensington, almost to State College, Brookville, those types of things. So the antenna is probably the most important part of any radio system. And this type of antenna is also used for repeaters. And that's about it. We have an informational meeting planned for November 9th, 7 p.m. at the Treasure Lake Sportsman's Club building in Cayman Landing. Everyone's invited. We can answer questions and figure out if we want to get going on this. The Treasure Lake Sportsman's Clubhouse is up in Cayman Landing, and the way you get there is you go to the marina and then go north up towards Cayman Landing, and then there are several cabins that are on a loop there off the right of the road. We're the first or the last cabin, actually, right there beside the edge of the road. So if you get a chance, come on out, and if you're interested, we'll see where it goes. So appreciate the time. Thank you.